at some point, Trump will make mistakes. At some point, there will be failures. And if he doesn't say this explicitly, this is me now, but like, if we have not cultivated the posture, the spiritual formation, the fortitude against all of the temptations toward nihilism to create something good in the aftermath, we'll just create something bad. Like there's such great potential here for us to be so hardened and twisted by all of this that he still wins in the end, even if he doesn't win politically in the end.
Okay. Less than halfway through the article, because it does sound from what we've said so far like it's a downer of an article. It is not.
That's why I like this article so much.
Less than halfway through the article, he says, how does this end? And then he completely changes to talk about other events in American history that have been similar, particularly the presidency of Andrew Jackson, and how he was probably the most Trumpian, nihilistic president that we had before Trump, and that the response to him was the creation of the Whigs Party, which was responsible for a great reformation of American systems and building of new institutions to help the common man and to hold up human dignity, so that the response to Jackson was more lasting than Jackson. And then he goes on to say, and I think this is my favorite part. Here we go. He says, we've reached a point of traumatic rupture. A demagogue has come to power and is ripping everything down. But what's likely to happen is that the demagogue will start making mistakes because incompetence is built into the nihilistic project. Nihilists can only destroy, not build. Authoritarian nihilism is inherently stupid. I don't mean that Trumpists have low IQs. I mean they do things that run directly against their own interests. They are pathologically self-destructive. When you create an administration in which one man has all the power and everybody else has to flatter his voracious ego, stupidity results. Authoritarians are also morally stupid. Humility, prudence, and honesty are not just nice virtues to have, they're practical tools that produce good outcomes. When you replace them with greed, lust, hypocrisy, and dishonesty, terrible things happen. So his conclusion is, terrible things are going to happen, which will not be pleasant for anyone. People will get hurt, but it will also probably mark the beginning of the end of this particularly, populist and nihilistic moment.
I really hope so, but I'm not convinced.
No, you're not convinced.
I'm not convinced. I mean, I think it would be fantastic to see a new kind of Whig movement that is virtuous and moral and constitutional and seeks the common good. And for those who don't know their history, the Whig Party kind of morphed eventually into the Republican Party under Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah.
And so that's that era. But I think there are I appreciate him making parallels to 19th century America, to Jacksonian America, to the Whig Party, but there are certain conditions which are fundamentally different in the 21st century that are unprecedented, that we can't know if they will go the same direction.
Sky, are you going to make the positive story less hopeful?
No, I hope I hope he's right. I just think there's a fundamental missing piece here, which and I think he maybe talks about this a little bit. Caitlin, you're like ready to go. What am I?
You talk about the fundamental missing piece you think's there, and then I'll talk about the one I think's there.
Okay.
I think one of the fundamental missing pieces here is digital media.
I knew you were going to say that.
Yes. Well, why is that bad?
You're right. You're right. No, you're totally right.
There were obviously it was newspapers primarily in the 19th century. It was before radio. It was before any of that. And there was a fragmentation of American media, but there were fewer fragmentations. And with algorithms and digital media, it's just exponentially worse. And it makes it that much harder to try to unify a country after a rupture like what we might be going through. So I hope the pattern holds that he's describing. I think there are variables that we don't know what effect they may have. And can the rupture be mended the way it was almost 200 years ago or not? So, Caitlin, what was the piece you think is missing here?
The return of Jesus Christ to make all things new. Okay, listen, though, I'm serious. But here's what I think is actually really cool about reading this piece in anticipation of Easter, truly. There is this movement he's making in a very earthly political sense of like, hey, things look so bad. But inside this really bad thing, are there actually these seeds of something positive that could come out of it? And we're about to spend all of Holy Week and then many weeks of Easter, but especially Holy Week, just thinking about the fact that from the perspective of humans at the time, this is the greatest defeat of what Jesus was trying to do. He is humiliated, he is killed, and his movement is over. And then what's actually happening behind the scenes is the resurrection. I mean, not only is the resurrection coming, but happening behind the scenes in the death, in the crucifixion of Christ, is the redemption of all things. I mean, not to like get on my harrowing of hell soapbox, but like he is literally pulling God's people out of the realm of the dead and proclaiming his victory over sin and death to demons in hell.
Maybe that mega prison in El Salvador is a metaphor for the harrowing of hell.
Listen.
And we're going to go down and pull them back out. And people are going to be inspired when they see the metaphor writ large. And then, so what you're saying is the good news is that's missing here, Jesus. The bad news that's missing here, smartphones. So it's Jesus versus the smartphones.
Well,
who can win?
But here's the thing. Here's the other part of this that is important. Our friend Malcolm Foley, who just did a Holy Post Live event with us, who's been on the show, who's been on like all of the shows, he was telling me recently about a sermon he was giving on the book of Revelation at his church in Waco. And he said one of the messages of the book of Revelation is not what you might think would comfort Christians in the midst of persecution and violence and injustice and evil. You might think the word that God would give to those Christians is things are not that bad. The word that God actually gives to those Christians are things are actually so much worse than you think they are. And I actually think something similar needs to be said to us today when we're looking at this long list of everything horrible going on. I'm not talking about the resurrection of Christ to be like, things aren't actually that bad. Actually, the death and resurrection of Christ that we are going to remember in our bodies and communally in Holy Week and then for many weeks of Easter is that actually, even though things seem really horrific and violent and unjust and evil right now, the truth is it's actually even worse than that. Like things actually are really worse than you think they are. And that is why such a extreme response from God was necessary. And thank God that he did it. And that we have hope to address these political evils, not to withdraw from political questions or to pat ourselves in the back and say, okay, well, everything's fine. I don't have to worry about the injustice that's happening, but to say I'm actually deeply motivated to care about these things because I know the end of the story is justice and reconciliation and redemption. And so I can work towards that end without feeling like I just have to be hopeless about everything horrible that's happening, which is mostly what I'm actually seeing on the left right now. I'm in a really progressive city in a school that has a lot of progressive activist type students. Most of them, when they hear this long list of awful things, are not inspired to do more. They're exhausted, they're overwhelmed, and they feel like there's nothing possibly good that can happen. So the death and resurrection of Christ should not be like a pious whitewashing of everything that's happening. Oh, it's fine, Jesus is coming back, everything's good. It actually should be, if the alternative is hopelessness, if the alternative is everything will just continue to get worse and there's nothing we can do, that doesn't actually spark the kind of political activity that you think is necessary. Actually, in most of Christian history, it's been a return to remembering the resurrection of Christ and the resurrection of our bodies that we are promised that's actually provoked great movement towards political justice.
Okay. Awesome. So what do you need to do? We got to wrap it up. We're out of time. What do you need to do? You can be aware of what's going on. It's okay to be aware of what's going on. Let's know. Let's not be hopeless. Let's not be nihilistic. Let's not say, oh, you're burning down the things that we think society needs, so we're going to burn down the things you think society needs. No.
Yeah.
No, let's not do that. But read this article and see if the second half gives you hope.